topic for today is to talk about why organizations need to start thinking more like the talented people that they want to attract. And I know in this conference so far, there's been a lot of conversation about it's become more complicated in the light of the pandemic. And I know that it's been a very pandemic-centric dialogue, but I think whilst we don't want to reinforce that, in a way we also can't avoid the reality that we are in this situation. We're all dialing into this conference from our respective home offices and looking forward to the time we can perhaps be together in person again. But I want to start to open up the conversation, really, I guess, and we can let this evolve into different directions. But I think the first point to address is the human element of attracting talent and looking at, our new operating model now is really around everything's as video conferencing. You hear the term Zoom fatigue or Teams fatigue. We've changed the way we operate overnight. I think video calling has gone from being a way that we communicate to being the way we communicate, the sole way. And while that's an important way of bridging the gaps between us, it has made it more difficult to engage in a human way, if you like. And I think sometimes people feel that perhaps we've lost the energy that being in a room with other people creates. There are no handshakes, there are no hugs, there are no, if you're on the continent, no air kissing, no pre-meeting catch-ups, and also you lose that, what I call the water cooler conversation, or daily chat as you're perhaps in the kitchen making a coffee and you start interacting with the colleague around an idea or a concept. So we've lost a lot of that forum for communication, and the video environment creates more of a let's get down to business mentality that can sometimes be perceived as depersonalizing our communications. And so I think really it's about today's exploring, it works well, but how do we avoid losing something when it stops becoming a hybrid form and our only form of communication? So I guess just maybe putting out to the room, how you've found communication in your organization and how you're seeing that's affecting the culture and how you attract and retain the talent that you want to. Any ideas you would like to reach out with? Again, war stories, perhaps? I think while you're thinking, the one thing I'll just share with you, at Kelly, we always had a remote culture. So I've been a remote-based worker for the last 4 years. So I've been used to using forums like in the old days it was Skype, but I used to travel a lot. So I would be on a plane mostly once a week, coming to conferences, meeting clients, always complaining to my husband that I travel too much. And now, of course, I'm complaining that I don't travel at all. But what was great in the old days, I'll call them, is that you would still use video and audio conferencing, but it was verification and validation. You had those high touch points. Even being a remote team, you still have those high touch points, whether it's for meetings, whether it's for workshops or conferences, and all of a sudden that's gone. So I think that is the difference I see, that without that, it becomes almost robotic. You're going straight into a call, your day is gone from, perhaps because you're cutting out travel time, or in my case, commuting to different countries time. I can find in my diary it's from 8 p.m. till 8 p.m. back to back to back. So I know a lot of companies we're talking to are doing things like, making sure that you have a shorter rhythm of meetings and you have blocks in between meetings that you always mandate people have, so that you don't have that intensity of 12 hours of video calling, because that's not sustainable. And I think that's the key point, is how do you sustain this? Because on one side, you've got the culture piece and the engagement of your talent, but on the other side, you don't want your talent burning out either, because they are on this video conferencing treadmill.
I reckon Jacqui. Sorry, my voice coming back. That's great, it's gone. So I'm in Cisco, and I've been a remote worker for the last 20 years or so, and much of our teams are. I've led a team most recently across EMEA where we met physically together once a year. And we made sure that when we did that, we properly immersed in understanding each other as humans. We rented a house, we cooked meals for each other. It was virtually no business content. It was all about understanding the diversity of who we are as a team. So even though we're seeing each other for the rest of the year through video calls, as much as we can, we're able to bring our whole self to work and understand and appreciate and trust each other, which is really important. I think even though we met once a year, we were always anticipating the next meeting. And I think that expectation, now that it's gone, we don't know when we're going to meet again. I can certainly feel that, we don't have that positive power of, next quarter's meeting or next year's meeting even. So I think giving people some hope that they can physically meet together, I think will be important. And obviously it's hope at the moment rather than being able to bank on anything. But my experience over the years is that teams can run really well in a distributed format, but you do have to bring them together at some point, and invest in that, and not bring them together to look at a bunch of slides they can look at remotely, but to do real interpersonal things together. So, yeah, I think that's the challenge. If you already had that, if a team already knows each other really well, I think there's a lot of inertia, and they could run for probably a long time. But we need to sort of feed that need. And I think it's, I mentioned in the breakouts yesterday, the definition of remote, one definition is what we're doing now. We're remote from each other, but we're connected. But the other dictionary definition is about being isolated and not part of something. And I think we walk a very fine line. And we have at Cisco over the years, and we pulled it off because we put people together. And I think that how do we meet that need and give people some hope and find some creative ways in the future to nurture that part of what people need from their connection at work.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think that being remote versus isolated, you're right, they're two very different things, but I think that can be, a consequence if it's not managed properly. It's interesting you mentioned too about having things like team events in the pre-pandemic days. I know that a lot of customers that we're talking to, and one thing we do within KellyOCG is we have a virtual quiz. And we toy with it because you want to have forums where people, if they are feeling isolated, can dial into the culture and have some fun and have that after work chat or coffee or drink with a colleague. But equally, you don't want yet another meeting that you've got to have that becomes like mandated fun, So we've just created a very, very casual opt-in if you need to run and you've got a family at home to look after and children to cook for, etc. That's also understood. But we give people the option if they want to dial into that. And another thing that we do is a virtual, we call it gin hour on a Friday at 5 o'clock. It's only 15 minutes, and so that's enough that someone doesn't think, oh, I've got another meeting. But if they want to dip into the room, they can do that. But equally, they're not obliged. And sometimes there's only 3 of us there, sometimes there's 5, sometimes partners walk in and it's never work related. But I think a lot of those, it's a very fine balance between creating that remote inclusion versus it becoming mandated. So it's a fine balance to strike, isn't it? Certainly, I think in the new world that we're in.
It's something what Andy's describing, I really recognise it. It's within my people team. Then we've fallen into this habit of having what we call tea and toast, and so, I think it's like gin hour, but it's just at the start of the week rather than the end of the week.
Right.
And it's become our habit as to how we start the week. We literally sort of sit down the first thing on the Monday, and we have breakfast together. And I think it is that. Someone said to me recently, which I thought was so smart, that we're not working from home. There's a danger we're living at work.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's trying to find those, how much do I share? Because, my team have met, all my children now, they've all sort of like wandered past and waved in a way that they would never have done in the office. And we've met one another's partners, and it's that sense of how much do you an agreed reference as to how we actually share, how much we're going to share, but there's still that thing about breaking bread together, and that's why I think tea and toast has been quite important for us.
Yeah. I like that, but I love your reference to differentiating between working from home versus living at work. Really, really important distinction. And in fact, I think that ties nicely onto the next topic I might just touch on in terms of looking at our timing here. But I guess what we also see with that living at work is potential risk in terms of mental health and wellness for people. So just keen to explore, I guess, now, have organizations changed their approach to mental health or wellness? And is this a trend in light of the pandemic, or is it a meaningful change? I think the pandemic has given us a focus on mental health and well-being at a level that we haven't seen in the past. And I think with many people working from home, they can forget to hit the switch off button as often as they should. So it's never been more important, I think, now as leaders and as organizations to demonstrate compassion and create a culture that isn't just based on non-stop work and visibility. And I think we've lost some of the natural ebb and flow of the working day, the coffee breaks, the quick chats at our desks. I was reading one article on the weekend about a chap in Sydney, actually, Australia, who drives. He gets up in the morning and puts his shorts on and his work shirt, but he drives 10 minutes around the block and comes back home to his office to start his day. And the same at the end of the day, he does a drive for 10 minutes at the end. And for him, I thought it was funny, but I thought, what a great way to create that separation. Because I think, if there is no on or off, it can be quite an impact in raising anxiety and stress levels. And I think back to that earlier point of it can make people feel isolated, not remote. And I think one thing, that's become very much apparent is the risk of burnout. So a lot of companies have successfully made mental health part of the conversation, but I think it's making sure now that takes priority in terms of wellness and avoiding burnout. The other thing we're seeing is a lot of rising compassionate posts on social media, but compassion shouldn't be something unusual. It should be a baseline of what being a good leader and a good human being is. So I think we have to look at behavior, at language, at communication to ensure that compassion and care for people is baked into everything that we do as leaders and organizations. So I guess just keen to kind of share kind of your views there in terms of is that changing how your organizations approach mental health as a whole? Are you seeing a change in direction? Is it a trend, or is it something that really you see as long-standing in your organizations?
So if I may, I'm wearing here in the States, September is National Suicide Awareness Month. So your question and your comments are spot on, particularly in the healthcare space, whether it's in human medicine or veterinary medicine. Burnout, compassion fatigue, those types of terms are unfortunately our reality in our day-to-day. And every organization is making tremendous strides, and certainly catalyzed by our COVID experience, because we, as essential workers, we don't have that opportunity to take those breaks. So, in one respect, it's very interesting to hear the questions and the concerns that our peers and colleagues have from working remotely and working at home. And that certainly does come with its own host of challenges. The flip side of that, however, is still continuing to stay front and center on the front line to battle this and to maintain a patient and family experience that still is perceived as a high value, high quality, high touch experience when you're not permitted to physically touch. So those are very interesting dynamics that everyone is trying to navigate right now. Health and wellness, mindfulness, well-being, micro steps, those are all educating our workforce. Just like people are upskilling in their digital competencies, they're also upskilling in adaptability quotient, resiliency, and all of those other, I don't want to say buzzwords, but those are the leading terms that we're all hearing about and talking about, fortunately talking about regularly, and reaching out to extend ourselves.
Yeah. And Melinda, thank you. I mean, that's a really interesting perspective, because I think, the risk of burnout I think you are literally on the front line. So I think for office-based workers, it's completely, and you almost feel, selfish, even that being an issue, because we're not on the front line, we're behind the scenes. So I think for you, with people on the front line, how do you avoid that risk of burnout and that mental health? Because again, I guess it's not just the sheer physical workload, it's then what they're being exposed to, and how do you come back the next day and reset?
I'm sorry, I was getting interrupted. So you cannot avoid it. You have to learn to manage it, right? We have to learn to manage it. And the worst thing we can do is try to manage it alone. I love the comment that you made about the gentleman who got in his car and drove around the block and got his day started. That provided that micro step, that small gesture, provides him with the mental space that he needs to compartmentalize and start and stop and frame his energies, if you will. He's going to frame his energy for my home life. I'm going to take this little break. A lot of people who rode public transportation would use that as their startup and their wind down. And that mental separation gives them the time to decompress. Another avenue that we're using is we are, and I have to give credit to our health and wellness team for this. They've created a 60-hour moratorium on negativity. Upon arrival into the hospital, within the first 60 minutes, you are not permitted to say anything negative. Because, of course, a smile is contagious. You catch it like the flu. Someone smiled at me today, and I found myself smiling too. Things like those little sayings. And another thing is, before you leave that door and get in your car, you have to say, what is one thing that even if it was a terrible shift, a terrible experience today, and there was death, and there always is, these are life and death situations. What am I most grateful for? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And what am I most grateful for? Because that's what allows you to go home, enjoy your family, get a good night's sleep, eat, rest, take care of yourself, and live to fight another day.
Excellent. I love that point also around gratitude and purpose. Really super important, I think, in every environment. But credit to your organization too for doing what you're doing. It's absolute respect. Any other pointers or war stories or examples of how people in our group today are addressing mental health and wellness? Again, we've all got different I guess, levels of that and different types of how that manifests in terms of our own environments. Andy, anything from you at Cisco? Because again, I imagine being a remote work culture, even pre this whole scenario, that was probably also a consideration point for your people, I imagine, also being remote for such a long time. I can't hear you, actually. Sorry,
I've got my mute button pressed. Apologies.
I wasn't sure if it was my technology playing up again.
Yeah, we've invested a lot over the years. The senior leadership team have invested, quite consistently in well-being and in mental health. And we have sort of company-wide check-in meetings, and the CEO has dedicated, half the agenda to that, and spoke personally, about challenges as well. So it's something we talk openly about. And this phrase of "it's okay to not be okay," I think we live that, and we have mental health responders, around the office and things like that. So not solution, but just an observation. I think if I think of my team at the moment, I think we have less chance, and even from the extended teams, to be able to spot people who are starting to struggle, and actually be able to say in the moment, "Are you okay?" And we have a check-in every week, and that check-in is, did I use my strengths? Did my manager talk to me? Did I contribute value? I think it'd be quite good if we had another little button on there to say, "Look, yeah, I'm okay." Just to do that check-in, and I think that's something that we should think about, and I think other businesses should as well. Again, I think there's a lot of momentum in this, and I think it's going to take a while for this to really manifest itself and show. So I think it's already in the system, and it just isn't revealing itself yet. But I think it's something we need to really be proactive about, and not wait to respond to some mental health tragedies. I think we need to get ahead of the game on this, and expect that it is there and go looking for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think really insightful, because I think, again, we're more exposed to that risk more now than ever, given the way that we're working. And as you alluded to before, this is going to be for quite some time. It's not just a 3 or a 6 month period. I like the idea of having like an "Are you okay?" Like, I don't know if anyone in this room uses Teams or whatever technology you're on, but having an "Are you okay?" option for people to check in on, I think is a great idea. And you make it fun, you make it interactive, but something I think that encourages that. And I think what I've observed certainly in the first months of the pandemic was, and again, I don't think it's pandemic centric, but you could almost sense energy flows in the organization each week, and almost tied around different countries' lockdowns, if they were going into lockdown or coming out. And so you could almost feel the pulse of the energy and the sometimes the Zoom fatigue or the video fatigue. And so and every company I talked to had that same peaks and troughs. And so I think there's going to be a way of I guess, as an organization, as you say, having a bit more of a proactive approach, because it is there. We just need to make sure that we identify it and we manage it as an organization. So very insightful.
I think in general, we can't see what's really happening behind the screen. So, people show up and present themselves. You didn't know that during the last session, I made some cheese scones, which I did. Made cooked, and now I'm eting them. And I was able to do that because I'm in the kitchen and the camera's off and kind of nobody cares. And I listened to properly.
Now you're just bragging.
So it's a hangover. We did sort of team bake-ins a while ago. So, but I think there's a lot of, we don't really know what's going on behind the screen. And I think, just like we need to look out for people who aren't declaring that they're being challenged, you also need to look really hard to try and understand what's really going on. I think there's a lot of discretionary effort, which I link to hopefully the future of work. It's people working when nobody's watching, and right now nobody's watching a lot of people, and you can portray one thing and be doing something entirely different. So I think the two sides of that. People may be hiding some great things they're doing, but also maybe hiding some of the challenges that they're struggling with as well.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. I think Johari's window is what I'm hearing loud and clear, resonating in my head right now. And I think that even though you're in a Zoom meeting and things are potentially much more casual, it's still a very professional environment, and people are still putting forth their best face. And so the "Are you okay?" button, I fear, will always be okay. But I think that's where those one-on-one touch bases with your people, to get to know them pre-crisis, where you're making all those emotional deposits in their bank account, their emotional bank account, so that whenever things do pop up in their lives that complicate things, extrinsic and intrinsic, things that they can control and that they cannot control, you have the ability, one, to be able to offer guidance, but two, refer them to the most appropriate resource where they can get some confidential assistance to get them back to be their best version of themselves that we want. But I often say we are human beings, not human doings. So it's really important that we get to know one another. And if there's no trust, there's no relationship. If there's no relationship, there's no leadership. It's a spiral that we're all very familiar with. So it starts with those one-on-one conversations. And to your point that you opened with recruiting talent, with unemployment levels being as high as they are right now, virtual interviewing should speed the process along. But what I'm finding is it's still very complicated to schedule meetings with stakeholders that are necessary for decision making, because they are back to back with those meetings, and everyone's trying to buy for their time. I tend to create meeting moratoriums on my calendar, and everyone is aware of those meeting moratorium times, and I stick to them as much as possible, unless my boss calls a meeting. Then I gotta defer to that. But I think protecting your time and your energies so that you can help be your partner's best partner is very important. And recruiting people virtually and taking them through the paces. I take the laptop and walk them through the hospitals, because they can't feel our energy. I can speak to them all day long about culture and kindness and our values and our mission. And the wonderful, I happen to be in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. So the wonderful culture that we have here in Atlanta. But it's totally different than breathing the air and feeling the vibe and the liveliness of their partners here within the facility. So I'd be eager to hear how others are working around that strategically to try and help not only keep their virtual recruitment timely, but also make sure that they're setting the appropriate expectations of their candidates coming in, so that they feel as if, yeah, this is what I was buying and this is what I got.
I think that linking to that, the onboarding process. So, when you've accepted the offer, what is your first day at work like? This is one of the things that we've been working through in our organization recently. When someone new comes into the team, is this how we're going to interact? Is there an opportunity to meet some members of the team in real life, or are we going to be avatars on a screen? And what difference does that make? And how do you establish the rules of the road from the start? How do you decide the level of formality versus informality? So how do you set out the ways of working? Who do you go to? Because you can feel some of the energy about this person is a good connector and they understand how we get things done, how we get stuff done around here. You can often feel that more immediately when you're in the same physical space together. But is that as easy when you're all virtual? So I think there's so much to sort of work through there. Otherwise, you can go sort of 8-10 weeks of someone's new employment and they've kind of made their decision about what the culture of the team is. And it's very difficult to unpick it after that.
Yeah, and I agree. And I love the idea that Melinda's talked about physically walking your laptop through the hospital as an example, because again, in some situations it's impossible to get a new recruit or an interviewee to a site. So I love that. That's probably it's a nice way to try to go behind the camera a bit, isn't it? And giving them an authentic experience so that there's no surprise from day one to, month 3, month 4. And Tim, I think that you raise a good point too, in terms of making sure that they're clear on, they've got a good feel for that culture, so that they're not forming the wrong opinions in that first 3 months. But interesting.
It's got me thinking that when I think it probably applies to particularly for freelancers as well. When you go to any new organization, you need to learn some facts about the organization, what it does. But what you're also doing is learning the context as well. And what's the body language of the organization? When's a good time to do something? Who's the right person to ask? And that's going to be very difficult to pick up. To the point, I think there should be some sort of context onboarding sessions. Somebody who can say, this is what really happens around here. I don't know how far you go, saying, well, this person always volunteers for something and never does it. You don't want to go into that sort of gossip across the line, but actually that's what you get when you join somewhere new, when you really get to meet with people and sit down and say, actually, go to Erica, she's fantastic. She'd always, tell you what you need. It's how do you find that when you're sitting on Zoom and everybody's being, formal or, playing a part rather than being the natural selves.
Yeah. And I think these are the kind of new normals we're going to need to establish, aren't they, with our new world? Because you can't just say, hey, Erica, can you pop in for a second? I know a few times I'll be on the worst offender if I'm on Teams. I'll try to call in somebody to join a meeting, but then of course they see me calling and think, hang on a minute, why am I being called? There's no meeting schedule, am I in trouble? So on one hand, you want to create that casual environment of walking up to somebody's desk. On the other hand, if things aren't scheduled, it can cause alarm bells. So again, I think all these things where we're kind of still working out as a globe, really, aren't we? What are our new modes of behaviour? I know we have about 7 minutes to go, so I might just touch on a final question around diversity and inclusion. So I think another point we talked about in the brainstorms on this session is unconscious bias shaping our response to wellness and supporting a remote workforce. So we talk about remote bias when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, but I guess talking about that in relation to our teams as we navigate a new remote world. I think, affinity bias is an unconscious preference for people who are similar to us. So It can impact the way we view people with different work and lifestyles to us, and something that may be more visible in a world where we can see into each other's homes and kitchens and lounges. So I think we need to think about unconscious bias in relation to the way we perceive where, how, and when people work, and what is their workspace like, how they're juggling childcare, how they're getting things done. And I think it's really important to offer compassion and understanding, because you'll have a situation where you've got the mother who's been homeschooling 3 children and her husband's also on conference calls all day. They're trying to balance schooling, time frames, schedules, etc. Perhaps they've only got one office to work from versus the millennial who's working in his bedroom because he's flat sharing with 5 other people. So, we've all got, to your point, Andy, again, things going behind the screen. So how do we make sure that unconscious bias doesn't affect how we support people and how we give them the flexibility they need to do their jobs in whatever environment they're working with that day?
Yeah, I think we need to care about their work habitat. I think we traditionally have this sort of workplace where people come, and it's like, well, once you cross the threshold, this is how it works here, and you're going to have a set of rules and norms. Now where it's different, people are trying to how to put it really, we're working on their turf. It's actually adapt to that more than probably we maybe expect we should do. I think because it's not discretionary. It's not if you go back a couple of years, someone wanted to work at home. It was like a favor. It was like something that was bestowed on you, that you're trusted. You can work at home a couple of days a week. It was a gift that could be taken away. Now it's a necessity. Yes, the business necessity, and the businesses are saving money, potentially long term on office accommodation. So, assuming that a big chunk of this stays in place, I think we need to recognise that they're actually sharing their home with us, with our business, and actually cut them a little bit of slack. So at least acknowledge that. I think the other thing around children, I think that's the one big learning we had as a team, is that we were divided into 2 very clear groups, those with young children at home and those without young children at home. And the difference was huge in terms of people's ability to be able to be on a call and not have the door open all the time. And we just really we went deliberately, speak to everybody and said, what are your commitments, for how long? And we just gave people chunks of time. And we said, look, carve out 2 core hours between yourself and your husband, who can cover what. And don't try and cover the whole day, each of you, because you're not going to be able to bring much of yourself into the meeting. So we really went overboard to try and properly accommodate that. And I think that was right. I think long term, a year from now, 2 years from now, you've got to start to equate, but how do we build that into how we work, and hopefully some sophisticated flexibility, I think, will maybe come from this. That allows people to flex up and flex down dynamically. Just like when we rent dynamic computing capacity, things like that. We have lots of things which we call off dynamically nowadays. Maybe this is opening the door to some more dynamism in how people are engaged and how they declare when they're online and when they're offline.
Yeah, and I love that idea of segregating the workforce to help them then dial in when it's convenient for them. Belinda, I think some final points from you. I'd love to hear if I can see you about to speak.
Well, no, I was just going to say, one thing that was not segregated for our organization is that they earmarked a financial allotment into our company store specifically for health and well-being items. So every employee received the same amount of dollars, and they had a wide variety of health and well-being items that they could choose from and select from. And it was an instantaneous hit with our associates within our organization from every level. They all just went crazy. So that was really a very tactical thing that the organization did. Another thing that I try to do personally, and I think we're all getting much better at it, is making sure that we are, as leaders, if we are working beyond our normal business hours, that we are not sending those emails outside of those business hours, and having our employees and our associates feel obliged to respond and also to be working during those time frames. So I think I've tried to be very diligent about that, especially now under COVID conditions where people are stressed, their children are being homeschooled. Perhaps one of their spouse or significant other is unemployed, so there's the additional financial stressors, let alone the time stressors with that. So these are extraordinary times for sure for our folks. So I agree with Andy. Anything that we can do to be flexible, to be empathetic, to be extraordinarily compassionate and bendable and flexible, we definitely need to be doing that now.
Yeah, I agree. Great insights. Thank you. And folks, I think we're going to be bounced back into the main room in about 1 minute or less. So Andy, thank you. Really great insights from yourself and Melinda also. Joanne, thanks for joining. I think Tim's gone back to the main room, but I think, we're all learning how to navigate this new norm. So I've got some great ideas. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of the conference. I'll see you back in the main stage.
Nice to meet you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.